April 4th, 1960. RCA Studio B, Nashville. 2 months had passed since Elvis Presley left Germany and the girl who had become his entire world. As he stood before the microphone to record, "Are you lonesome tonight?" his voice trembled with a question that had haunted him every single day since leaving Bad Nauheim. Was Priscilla as devastated by their separation as he was? What the world heard as a romantic ballad was actually Elvis's desperate message in a bottle, thrown across the Atlantic Ocean, praying it would somehow reach the 14-year-old girl who held his heart captive. This wasn't just a recording, it was a man asking the only question that mattered anymore. March 1960, Graceland. Elvis walked through his mansion like a man haunted by a ghost he couldn't exorcise, the ghost of Priscilla Beaulieu. Every room reminded him of her absence. He would catch himself setting 2 places at the dinner table before remembering she was 5,000 miles away. He'd reach for the phone at 3 in the morning, calculating time zones, wondering if calling her again would make him seem desperate, or if not calling would make her think he'd forgotten. The letters arrived almost daily from Germany, each one a lifeline that simultaneously sustained him and tortured him. Priscilla wrote about school, her friends, the mundane details of teenage life in Bad Nauheim. But between the lines, Elvis could read her loneliness, her confusion about why he had left her, her fear that this separation would become permanent. She never asked the question directly, but it was there in every carefully chosen word. "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me the way I miss you?" Elvis's return to civilian life had been celebrated worldwide. Colonel Parker orchestrated his comeback like a military campaign, television appearances, recording sessions, movie deals. The world wanted Elvis Presley back, and they wanted him bigger than ever. But the man who returned from Germany was fundamentally different from the one who had left. He had gone to Europe as a superstar and come back as a man in love, and those 2 identities were impossible to reconcile. His friends and family tried to help him move on. They introduced him to actresses, models, beauty queens, women who would have done anything to be with Elvis Presley. But he couldn't see them. Every face became Priscilla's face. Every voice sounded wrong because it wasn't her voice. Every touch felt empty because it wasn't her touch. He was trapped in a nightmare where he had everything the world could offer except the one thing he actually wanted. The nights were the worst. Graceland, designed to be a palace of entertainment and excess, became a prison of solitude. Elvis would wander through the empty rooms at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, tormented by memories of their time together in Germany. The way she laughed at his jokes, the innocent way she looked at him, seeing past the fame to the vulnerable man beneath. The feel of her hand in his, so small and trusting. He tried to write letters back to her, but words felt inadequate. How could he explain that he thought about her every waking moment? That her absence was a physical pain in his chest? That returning to America without her felt like he had left his soul behind in Germany? The letters he sent were carefully composed, appropriate for a girl her age, but they couldn't contain the desperate longing that consumed him. What he needed was something more, a way to ask her the question that haunted him without saying it directly. He needed music. April 3rd, 1960, the day before the recording session. Elvis sat in his music room at Graceland, listening to a demo of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" That had been sent over by RCA. The song, originally written in 1926, had been recorded by numerous artists over the decades, but it had never been a major hit. Colonel Parker suggested it because it showcased Elvis's ability to do more than just rock and roll. It proved he could be a serious vocalist, a crooner in the tradition of the great ballad singers. But when Elvis heard the opening spoken word section, something clicked in his mind. The lyrics asked exactly the question he wanted to ask Priscilla. "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart?" It was as if someone had reached into his heart and extracted his deepest fears and longings, transforming them into poetry. This wasn't just another song. This was his message to her. The next day, Elvis arrived at RCA Studio B in Nashville with a determination that surprised his musicians. Usually relaxed and playful in the studio, today he was focused, almost obsessed. He asked for the lights to be dimmed, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt more like a confessional than a recording session. As the opening notes began, Elvis closed his eyes and transported himself back to Germany, to the last night he had spent with Priscilla. The first verse came out soft, vulnerable, almost fragile, so different from his usual powerful delivery. Elvis wasn't performing for an audience. He was talking directly to Priscilla, asking her the questions that tormented him every night. His voice carried the weight of genuine longing, the ache of separation, the desperate hope that she was feeling the same pain he felt. Then came the spoken word section, and Elvis transformed the recording into something unprecedented. Instead of simply reading the words, he inhabited them, turning the theatrical monologue into an intimate conversation. He spoke as if Priscilla were standing right in front of him, as if he could see her face in the darkness of the studio. The vulnerability in his voice was so raw that the musicians stopped playing, mesmerized by what they were witnessing. When Elvis sang the question again, "Are you lonesome tonight?" it wasn't a performance technique. It was a genuine plea for an answer he desperately needed. The engineers in the control room looked at each other, recognizing they were capturing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a good recording. This was Elvis Presley's heart being transmitted through electromagnetic waves, hoping to cross an ocean and reach the one person who could answer his question. The session stretched into the early morning hours as Elvis insisted on multiple takes, searching for the perfect balance between control and vulnerability. When he finally approved the master take, he stood at the microphone for a long moment in silence, as if sending a telepathic message to accompany the musical one. Then, without a word to anyone, he left the studio and drove back to Graceland alone, wondering if Priscilla would somehow know that the song was meant for her. May 1960, Bad Nauheim, Germany. Priscilla Beaulieu sat in her bedroom, doing homework while the Armed Forces radio played in the background. She had fallen into a depression since Elvis left, going through the motions of teenage life while feeling like a part of her had been amputated. Her parents watched helplessly as their usually vibrant daughter became withdrawn, spending hours in her room, waiting for letters from America that arrived irregularly and said too little. Then she heard his voice coming through the radio, and her pencil froze mid-word. The DJ announced a new release from Elvis Presley, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" And suddenly, Elvis was in her room, his voice soft and intimate, asking her a question that made tears spring immediately to her eyes. Was she lonesome tonight? God, yes. Every night. Every moment. Did she miss him? So much that it physically hurt, like a constant ache in her chest that never went away. As the song continued, Priscilla understood with absolute certainty that Elvis was singing directly to her. The way his voice broke slightly on certain words, the intimate tone he used in the spoken section, this wasn't for a general audience. This was his message to her, his way of asking if she was suffering as much as he was. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying not to sob out loud and alert her parents in the next room. When Elvis asked if she was sorry, they drifted apart. Priscilla wanted to scream into the radio that they hadn't drifted. He had left her. He had chosen his career, his life in America, his responsibilities over their love. But even as anger flashed through her, she knew it wasn't that simple. He hadn't had a choice, not really. The world demanded Elvis Presley, and one 14-year-old girl in Germany couldn't compete with that. The song became Priscilla's obsession. She bought the single as soon as it was released in Germany, playing it over and over until her parents complained and she had to use headphones. She would lie on her bed in the darkness, listening to Elvis's voice, and imagine he was there with her, asking his questions and waiting for her answers. Yes, she would whisper into the darkness. Yes, I'm lonesome. Yes, I miss you. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I still love you. Her friends at school noticed the change. They had watched Priscilla's mysterious relationship with some American soldier end when he returned to the States, and they had assumed she would get over it like any teenage heartbreak. But as weeks turned into months and Are You Lonesome Tonight played constantly on the radio, they began to understand that something deeper was happening. The song became associated with Priscilla, other students falling silent when it played, watching to see her reaction. One night, Priscilla sat down and wrote Elvis a letter, unlike any she had written before. She told him she had heard the song. She told him she knew it was for her. And she answered his question. Yes, she was lonesome tonight and every night. Yes, she missed him desperately. Yes, she was sorry they were apart. But more importantly, she asked him a question in return. What are you going to do about it? Because loving each other across an ocean wasn't enough. One of them had to be brave enough to bridge the distance, or this lonesome longing would destroy them both. Summer 1960. Are You Lonesome Tonight climbed to #1 on the Billboard charts, becoming one of Elvis's biggest hits. The irony wasn't lost on him. His most personal, vulnerable recording was now being played at parties, danced to by strangers, sung along to by people who had no idea they were listening to a love letter. But Elvis didn't care about the commercial success. He only cared about whether Priscilla had heard it and understood. Her letter arrived in June, and Elvis read it so many times that the paper became soft and worn at the folds. She had heard the song. She had understood, and she was asking him to do something about it. Her words challenged him in a way that cut through all his fears and hesitations. What was he going to do? Was he going to let their love die of distance and time, or was he going to fight for it? The answer came slowly, through months of careful planning and delicate negotiations. Elvis began the long process of convincing Priscilla's parents to let her come to America. It would take 2 more years of letters, phone calls, promises, and arrangements, but Elvis was determined. Are you lonesome tonight? Had been his question. Bringing Priscilla to America would be his answer. In the meantime, the song became their secret language. When Elvis performed it in concerts, he would think of Priscilla in Germany, watching him on television or hearing recordings. When Priscilla heard it on the radio, she knew Elvis was thinking of her in that moment, asking his question across the miles that separated them. The song was their invisible thread, keeping them connected when everything else tried to pull them apart. Years later, after they married and then divorced, after joy and pain and everything in between, Are You Lonesome Tonight remained special to both of them. It represented the moment when love proved stronger than distance, when a question whispered across an ocean received an answer that changed both their lives. The song that began as Elvis's desperate plea became the soundtrack to a love story that captivated the world. The legacy of Are You Lonesome Tonight extends beyond its commercial success or its place in Elvis's catalog. It stands as proof that music can transcend distance, that the right song at the right moment can say everything words alone cannot express. Elvis used it to bridge an ocean, to maintain hope during an impossible separation, and ultimately to bring Priscilla back into his life. The question he asked in April 1960 was finally answered in March 1963, when Priscilla stepped off a plane in Memphis and into his arms, proving that yes, they had both been lonesome, and no, they didn't have to be anymore. Are You Lonesome Tonight became more than Elvis's biggest ballad hit. It became his most intimate communication with the love of his life. The song proves that sometimes the most powerful messages are delivered not through direct words, but through music that speaks to the soul. Elvis's whispered question across an ocean received its answer, and two lonesome hearts found their way back to each other through the universal language of love and music. What songs have connected you to someone across distance? Share this story and tell us about the music that kept your love alive when everything else tried to tear it apart. Subscribe for more untold stories of how music bridges the impossible distances between hearts.